want to thank you for checking out another podcast of We Ain't Scared Talk, where we ain't scared. My name is A1, and first and foremost, let me say again, happy Black History Month. I hope you are enjoying it as much as I am. Black History Month is an opportunity for everybody, not just Black people, to reflect on all the positive contributions that Black Americans have made to America and all of the obstacles, hurdles, and things we've had to overcome just to live a reasonable facsimile of the American dream. Most of you know, Black Americans since 1619 have been fighting in this country against racism, hate, oppression, and we still have made a way. And I often think how much further along and how much more successful we could be without the systemic racism and oppression that is constantly fighting against our forward progress. So just keep fighting, keep pushing forward, and know that you are valuable. Your Black life matters, regardless as to what this country says or what it does. And we still need reparations. Okay, last June, there was a historic Capitol Hill, I guess you call it, presentation, statements that were made by Black celebrities and professionals and academics, and we were basically making a case for reparations, which we still have not received. The U.S. government owes Black Americans or American descendants of slavery $17 trillion. $17 trillion. And we don't want to hear anything about it would bankrupt the country. That ain't the point. The point is you owe it. It's a debt. You need to pay it. All right. Now, let me get into some notes here. And that is one, let me say thank you for everybody that supports this podcast. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. If you've listened to at least 2 or 3 of these podcasts, then that means you're a supporter, and hit that like button or that subscribe button. I appreciate it. Let's see. Your ears are so important to me. And let us see. What else? Though the mugs. Yes, I can never forget about these We Ain't Scared Talk mugs. They are black. They are strong. And they can handle anything hot that you pour in it. And as I always say, your IQ is going to go up dramatically and significantly because you have it. You don't believe it? Test it out. Let me know. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into today's topic. Now, there are a lot of notes here, and I'm not going to rush through it. I'm going to take my time because this particular topic, there are a lot of Black professionals in America and around the world, but we're talking about America, that have participated, that are members, that are associated with Greek life, Black fraternities and sororities. So let me just tell you the topic, and then I'll try to realign this whole thing. So the topic is, why do Black fraternities represent Greek letters? Why do Black fraternities represent Greek letters? All right, so, and this is not me attacking Black fraternities and sororities. So let me just stop that train before it leaves the station. We have to get to a point, especially in Black culture, where we peel back some of the layers, even though we fell in love with it, we're enamored with it, and we've made it a significant part of our social life, our professional life, doesn't mean that it's something that we should continue to do just because we've always done it. Sometimes we have to force ourselves to look at things from a realistic, factual standpoint. Not saying that everybody's going to like it, but if we only talked about things that people liked, we probably wouldn't push ourselves outside of our comfort zones. And the whole point of this podcast being for black men by a black man is that black men are stepping up, standing out, and saying how we really feel, regardless as to what people think. All right, so let me give you some backstory on this particular podcast. In, I want to say, probably August of 2019, there was a clothing company that had Greek symbols on their pants. And Black Enterprise had a cover where it stated Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Inc. demanded that this clothing company remove these Greek letters from their pants. They felt it was disrespectful. Now, Phi Beta Sigma is a historically African American fraternity. It's a professional organization or fraternity. It was founded at Howard University in D.C., Washington, D.C., on January 9th, 1914, by 3 young African American male students, with 9 other Howard students as charter members. Now, let me also qualify by saying I'm not going to be able to cover every possible component, layer, perspective on this. This is just to start the conversation. You're going to have your own thoughts and opinions, and that's fine. But what I'm going to attempt to do is to position the start of these black fraternities and position it next to the white genesis or starting point and try to figure out how these two merged. All right? So I appreciate your patience. And let me just take a quick look here. All right, so let's go ahead and we will start here. As I said earlier, it's your life, and you can do with it whatever you want. If you want to pledge every fraternity or sorority on the planet, that is your prerogative. My position is just, again, to understand what it means and how we got here in the first place. All right, now that that's done, we're going to go back in time, and then we're going to come forward in time. We're going to start in ancient Egypt, Kemet, the Nile Valley. Let's say about 5,000 years ago. Now, I always like to quote my sources, and yes, there are, again, more than this particular source, and that I'm going to quote. But this specific source does a really good job of covering most of the information that I will be sharing. As some of you know, if you follow me on social media, there's a book. It's called The Stolen Legacy, The Egyptian Origins of Western Philosophy, written by George G.M. James. Now, this book is extremely in-depth, and I encourage you to buy it. It's on Amazon, so you can verify, you can read it for yourself, and you can draw your own conclusions. But it does a really good job of connecting the dots. And now, number one, this is a direct quote from the book, okay? After nearly 5,000 years of prohibition against Greeks, they were permitted to enter Egypt for the purpose of their education. So mind you, 5,000 years, the Greeks were not permitted to enter into Egypt, but they let them in for educational purposes. Now, first, there was a Persian invasion, and then the second invasion by Alexander the Great was in 332 BC. Now, the Egyptian mystery system is what they were trying to protect from outside invaders. And the Egyptian mystery system encompassed all of the knowledge, the language, the arts, the sciences that existed and that were mastered and explored by these black Egyptians. All right, number 2, Greeks were, for simplicity, for the purposes of this podcast, they were white men. And those white men that were allowed to enter the country of Egypt took advantage of the Egyptian kindness and invaded and looted the Library of Alexandria, where thousands of years of intellectual property were stored. And as I alluded to, mathematics, the Pythagorean theorem for geometry, that was not an original Greek discovery, that was Egyptian. Philosophy, science, humanities, liberal arts, it was all Egyptian. The theft, this is number 3, the theft and or looting of the Royal Library of Alexandria by Alexander the Great, again a Greek. They stole numerous books on thousands of subjects and then gave the credit to Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. So let me oversimplify where we are so far. Black people, or Egyptians, for thousands of years prohibited white men from entering their city, and all was well. And after 5,000 to 6,000 years, black people allowed white men to enter the city to be educated, and those white men took advantage of the access to rob, steal, and loot the same information that black men were using to teach the uneducated white men, and the white men claimed it as their own and gave credit for the authorship to other white men or Greeks like Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. This is not to be minimized here. Black men trusted white men. And that is what led to the downfall and the looting. And let me just put a little thumbtack here. This in America has always been a war or a battle between black men and white men. Always. Number 4, Greeks, like most civilizations of that time, were violent and had a thirst for conquest. While the Egyptians were primarily focused on education and knowledge, black people were not interested in warfare. That's not in our nature. Remember that. Okay, here's number 5. It can't be stressed enough that Egypt was the center of the body of ancient wisdom, where there was knowledge, religious, philosophical, and scientific information, and an immense amount of study and cataloging that took place. Number 6, one other note before we move forward. The schools of philosophy, Chaldean, Chaldan, Chaldean, Greek, and Persian, they were part of the ancient mystery system of Egypt. Number 7, here is a final thought before we move forward on the history before we deal or dig into the next layer. The Egyptian theory of salvation became the purpose of Greek philosophy, which was then passed forward to the Western world and others, and thus the birth of Christianity that so many black folks still follow today. Now, I will say stolen because based on the information that exists, the origin, the virgin birth, that was all stolen from Egypt and then bastardized into the various religions that exist in the world today. But keep in mind, again, it was rooted in Egyptian philosophy that had nothing to do with what you see today with the various religions, including Christianity. So again, the Greeks, white men, invade, steal, from their black educators and steal that knowledge and keep it for themselves. And then they proclaim to the world that they originated the thoughts, when in fact, it's a lie. So as I logically think this through, the next thought is, how did we make this leap from Greek, white men, to black men, fraternities, self-identifying with the enemy that invaded and destroyed our legacy and history? That's a very important question. How did we make that leap? All right, here we go. So I know that may be a lot to absorb, but let's continue down the rabbit hole. The next few questions are, number one, how many black fraternities are there? Number two, what was the first black fraternity? Number three, why was the Greek adopted as the black fraternity identity when obviously the Greeks were not black? Number four, what college or university has the most black Greeks? And number five, why do HBCUs, or historically black college and universities, have Greek fraternities on their campus if they know the history of Greeks? These are very important questions. So let's start with number one. And all this you can Google, it's online, okay? So now we're going to fast forward to the history of the black Greeks. There are 9 historically black Greek letter organizations, or BGLOs, that make up the National Pan-Hellenic Council. Now, collectively, these organizations are referred to as the Divine Nine. Now, each of these fraternities and sororities is rich in history. They have ties to one or more of these organizations, and as we all know, they are found in many college-educated black families in the United States. So we're going to break it down. Alpha Phi Alpha, founded in 1906 at Cornell University. Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, founded in 1908 at Howard. Kappa Alpha Psi, founded in 1911 at Indiana University. Omega Psi Phi, founded in 1911 at Howard. Delta Sigma Theta sorority, founded in 1913 at Howard. Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, founded in 1914 at Howard. Zeta Phi Beta sorority, founded in 1920 at Howard. Sigma Gamma Rho sorority, founded in 1922 at Butler. And Iota Phi Theta fraternity, founded in 1963 at Morgan State University. Now, the Kappas are part of the Divine Nine, or the National Pan-Hellenic Council. And again, these are historically black fraternities and sororities as we move through the discussion. But first, let me define the National Pan-Hellenic Council. The National Pan-Hellenic Council is a collaborative organization of 9 historically African-American international Greek-lettered fraternities and sororities. So that's what the Pan-Hellenic terminology means. And it all goes back to the Divine Nine, okay? So a continued definition relating to all Greece or all the Greeks. Again, this is white. Or relating to the Greek letter sororities or fraternities in American colleges and universities, or to an association representing them. All right, I know it's a lot, but just stay with me. Now, Sigma Pi Phi is the first successful and oldest African-American Greek-lettered organization. Sigma Pi Phi was founded in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on May 15, 1904. Okay, now we're going to continue. To be honest, I've never been a fan of black fraternities or sororities, based on the fact that they appear to just be a secret society like Masons that serve their own purposes and don't really care about black people that aren't a member of their club. I say that's a problem. I'm for all black people getting ahead, not just the ones that get hazed or verbally abused as they're crossing the burning sands. The abuse factor in that has never been, I've never been a fan of it. You know, I'm sure a lot of people feel like, hey, I earned it, I crossed over. My personal feeling is black people have suffered enough humiliation. They've suffered enough abuse. They've suffered enough from the hands of non-black people. So why are black people doing it to black people? Something to think about. Number 3, why was the Greek adopted as the black fraternity identity when obviously the Greeks were not black? Let's deal with that. So there were 7 of them, okay? Some were members of the Prince Hall Masons, and this is where the leap starts to take place. A secret society, and others were the sons of members. It was a cold and stormy night on December 4th, 1906, when they gathered in upstate New York. These black Cornell University students decided to create an organization that had no precedent. This is the origin story. And they did so with opposition from their white counterparts on campus and in the community. Now, they also had opposition from their own, said one of the founders, Nathaniel Murray, who shared some of their comments in an essay written by Andre Mackenzie about the organization's beginning. "You will be the laughingstock of the town," Murray recalled them saying. "You cannot hope to do what white folks do. You will lose your job as waiters if you try to imitate your employer." Still, they were determined, meaning these black people. They started the first continuous African-American intercollegiate fraternity in the nation, Alpha Phi Alpha. So again, we're connecting the dots. Freemasons, which had its origins in the Egyptian mystery system, this is a fact, black people, was brought to the U.S., and black people attending colleges and universities adopted an elitist social club mentality to create an academic infrastructure that was supposed to give their black members certain professional and societal advantages by being a member of these organizations. But with all this alleged education, what I still wonder, as I said earlier, how come these black minds didn't connect the dots that it was the Greeks that destroyed and plundered their black Egyptian ancestors? So here's more about the history and the origin of Greek fraternities and sororities. The formation of Greek letter organizations in the United States is most often traced back to the creation of Phi Beta Kappa in 1776 at the College of William and Mary. While this organization was literary in nature, it had many of the characteristics we see in present-day fraternities and sororities. For example, the use of Greek letters, motto rituals, and officers. During the 19th century, Greek letter social organizations, which were organized and separated by normative notions of the gender binary, began to emerge and expand on college campuses. Membership in these organizations reflected the broader collegiate student population of the time, regulated by both formal and informal racist practices and policies that allowed for broader access to higher education for white students. Okay. Now, these college-going practices resulted in the creation and expansion of organizations referred to in this chapter as historically white fraternities and sororities. Now, it's important to note that white students during this time period were defined not only as racially white, but also as Anglo-Saxon in ethnicity and Protestant in religion. Now, while historically white fraternities and sororities were growing and expanding, the participation of students of color in higher education continued to be regulated by racist laws that excluded them from attending college or segregated them into specific colleges and universities. Now, some black students had found educational homes at private, historically black colleges and universities, and the more recently created public HBCUs, often referred to as the 1890s schools. Now, additionally, some students of color, black, it says Latinx, Native American, Asian, although small in number, were attending historically white institutions. Now, for those students, access did not translate to full opportunities to participate in university life at all. Rather, access was often intertwined with exclusion for students of color. So, on the one hand, I understand, okay, black people excluded, black people felt left out, we want to create our own. I get that. But by the turn of the 20th century, this exclusion had manifested into specific ways on college campuses, including denial of residential housing, use of recreational spaces, and at institutions where Greek letter organizations were present, there were other exclusions as well. Now, these restrictive policies created conditions in which students of color were socially homeless, invisible to the majority, with no virtual or physical dwelling. Racist policies such as these took a toll on students of color and provided an impulse or an impetus for creating new social organizations specifically for students of color. I don't have a problem with that in terms of you felt disenfranchised, you wanted to be included. I get it. Again, now historically, African Americans, which we use interchangeably with blacks, the aspirations to find activities in higher education to empower, uplift, and support them while receiving an education motivated them to create these organizations, these Divine Nine organizations. This is obvious in the start, the rise, and longevity of the historically black Greek letter organizations. Okay, this was in response to Reconstruction and during the time of Jim Crow. Now, as noted, African Americans were not welcomed to join any of the historically white fraternities and sororities, and many university administrators would not allow African Americans to form their own organizations. African Americans were concerned not only about being socially accepted, but about fellowship for the sake of protection and promotion of ideals in spite of white supremacy, in order to uplift black Americans. Now, the first two black Greek letter organizations, founded in 1906 and 1908, were partly mirrored to the white fraternities and sororities. However, unlike the socially focused, historically white fraternities and sororities, the mission of the BGLOs included a principle of service to the community. Again, sounds good. What college or university has the most black Greeks, and does this create an identity crisis among black Greeks? Because it sounds like an oxymoron, kind of like cat dog, black Greek. I'm a black Greek. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. Black fraternities and sororities are on virtually every major college or university campus in the U.S. and abroad. Number 5, why do HBCUs have Greek fraternities on their campus if they know the history of the Greeks? This is so compelling to me. It's important. I think I may have answered the why based on the disenfranchisement and not wanting to feel left out. So I guess the next question is, how come they haven't been removed? Now, I know there's a lot of people are like, what do you mean removed? I say this based on historical facts that we've just covered. Greeks plundered and looted the most sacred of royal libraries in Egypt and proclaimed the knowledge as their own. And in my opinion, to represent anything Greek is fostering and reinforcing the hate that destroyed our legacy as Black people. Yes, I know. We love the dances, we love the step shows, the colorful clothes, and pomp and circumstance. But if you hypothetically found out that an organization was in existence that was profiting off the death of your family and getting people to join under the auspices of giving back to the community, how would you feel? Would you encourage people to join, or would you fight this organization to redeem your family legacy? I think it would be the latter. I hope it would be the latter. Now, I realize Black Greek letter organizations are deeply and steeply entrenched in the Black college experience. But just like the Black church, just because that's what has always been done does not mean it's the way it should continue. I hear people tell me all the time, A1, just because somebody does hateful things to you does not mean you should do hateful things back. But the irony, in my opinion, that's exactly what Black people are doing when they join a Greek fraternity and sorority. They're returning hate for hate. You're putting your Black history in an inferior position while uplifting the white society here in America. Black people don't need Greek letters to identify with. There are plenty of Egyptian hieroglyphs and symbols that Black people can use to identify our intellect and education if we decide to do the research and embrace it. And that's the key. Why don't we embrace it? It's not like libraries aren't on every campus. The internet will tell you everything. How come we won't do it? That's all I'm saying. Look, if you're in a fraternity, a Black fraternity or sorority, you love the community, you love the fact that there's family. I get that, but I'm always going to go back to the beginning. If you have a conversation with me, I'm going to go back to the beginning. And again, that's Egypt, that's Kemet, that's Nile Valley, that's Black. Now, I'm certain you have your own thoughts and on this topic, and I'm not saying, oh my God, the Black Greeks is terrible that you do, but I will say this: what are you perpetuating? Like, really, what are you perpetuating? And I'm sure a lot of these young kids haven't even thought about it because they just like the idea of wearing a letter. It's like a letterman's jacket. But we do have to start thinking about it. So, yeah. Now, I'm sure you have your own thought on this. Again, just keep the conversation going. It's important. And I want to thank you for checking out another podcast of We Ain't Scared Talk. My name is A1. And you got some good food for thought. Listen again. Tell a friend. We ain't scared.